Lovely. So this is the start of 5D storytelling, which makes me very excited as a 5D theatre maker and everything very 5D. And so I call it 5D storytelling because I'm transitioning the name of the course I've been running, Channel Your Soul Story, into 5D storytelling. And the reason I'm doing that is because I want to make it a bit more about the multidimensionality, the supernatural, the soul, the spirit of the story that you want to say, and not have to confine it to being like past lives and soul stories. But many people know about me, I love to write my own soul story. And I'm chatting with you today, Alison, because you've also written your soul story and continue to write soul stories. And I think this work's really exciting. And I think there's many people that do it. And I often think it's about finding them and also sharing a little bit of that process, especially when you work as a healer and a creative, like I do, like you do. And that actually I think those worlds interweave quite beautifully. And that, that the fact that, well, this is my feeling, but you can share yours, that healing is such a sacred part of my craft that I honor. I honor all my clients that I work with. I always try and push myself to be bigger and bolder and braver because I'm about being the spiritual me too, so that no one I work with feels alone and that they can speak the unspeakable and they can be held in the wealth of what it is to be a spiritual person.
Yes.
And so I also feel that way about my craft, my theatre work, and my acting work and my writing work, that actually I shouldn't have to hide who I am as a multidimensional healer. I'm writing the stories for this collective. And I've been persecuted many lifetimes for being the kind of person that I am. So I'm not going to do it to myself in this life. So that is why I'm very excited to bring you on, share your story, and also hear a little bit about your creative practice and your writing. But particularly today, I want to show it. You sent me a copy of your beautiful book, A Songbird Whose Name is Love. Just got chills reading it. And if you wouldn't mind, I think it's a beautiful place to start with the epilogue about the book, and then we'll talk about it a little bit. Because I just think yeah, I read the book straight through one sitting. I think I was going to the dentist and I was like, oh, I'll bring a light book with me. And then I started to read it. And then I was so into it that I do this sometimes, which is probably not good, but I read when I walk along the street and I read when I'm going into the tube. And so I didn't want to put it down. So I was like reading it all the way till I got home. And I was like, I'm probably bumping into people. I'm probably being really annoying. But I just
Um,
had to devour it. And I'll tell you why afterwards.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much and I think finding you, Cheryl, and finding the channeling the soul story was just such a revelation because it made me understand why this happened, why it took so long, and it just has really helped me to understand the craft that it is healing. And this book, and for me as well, as having written it, it was such a healing journey.
Yeah.
It really helped me so much. So I felt this voice that was speaking to me was healing me at the same time. So
I
yeah,
loved that. And I realized that with the course, and I actually was like, I say it to so many people, and I'm coming back to it myself even more so, that it's less about the craft. I was thinking about this morning and about why I was changing it to 5D storytelling and the offering that was, and more about the healing work that takes
yeah,
part of it, because you might have found this yourself as well, that it can be quite a solitary healing process.
yes,
And then because it's about stuff that not everybody talks about, you can think, oh my God, am I going out of my
yeah,
mind here?
yeah,
Is this, I mean, for me, the reason I started the course, because I wrote Awaken, my past life about being killed as a witch. And I went through all this trauma and
hmm,
thought, who can I speak to about this? Like all of this
yeah,
stuff came up, and it was so big for me at the time. And I didn't know how to put that into the theatre world. Like who could I speak to in the theatre world about it? And who could I speak to in the healing world about it? Because I was the bridge in between being the
Yeah,
writer and the creator and the healer. And so this is what I love that you brought the healing up, because I think it's the most important part of saying to creatives. And that's why I started to gather groups and start to teach practices, and to always try and put the healing at the forefront, because it will change your life.
yeah,
Writing a story like this,
yes,
it'll bring up a lot of stuff, and it will remind you at some stage, and it might take many, many, many years. It took
yes.
me, I mean, I was up writing my ending of Awaken last night. I was literally, there was something more. And I thought,
Okay.
wow, the journey you go on to get to know yourself and what your soul's really doing here and what it's pushing you to do is immense.
It is amazing. And I think it's not doubting that that story is important, because I know I was made to believe that I was, you know, why? Why should your story be so important? But it was this voice, this feeling, this energy inside that very gently but profoundly pushed me to finish it. So,
And why did you feel that, who made you feel that your story wasn't important?
one of my mentors who said past lives should be left where they are and not delved into. And luckily, I trusted my intuition and went with it. But yes,
Oh my
um,
God,
yeah,
that's
so,
almost going to kill me. I
yeah,
mean,
so,
what, and that's so interesting, because I've had people ask me like, why regurgitate your story? You know, are you stuck in this trauma? And
yeah,
actually, that's my mentor said to me, maybe you should choose a different thing to do as an actor, because you're going down the traumatic path of reliving this experience. And I listened to the gut that said, no, 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 no. And what I now realize is that I would have thrown my soul to the wolves if I hadn't have done it, because my
yeah,
soul was like, I want you to remember me.
yes,
There's nobody else out there wants to remember you. You're not in the history books.
yes,
You're not in
exactly.
there, and you got killed for your craft.
Yeah,
So if
yeah,
you don't remember me, how are we going to get history honored? How are we going to get
exactly.
justice?
Yes,
So
exactly. It's an honoring of someone who hasn't been heard. And
yeah,
I felt that so strongly. That's what kept me going, even though it took such a long time. So this might inspire anybody who's written maybe a page and given up, because it did take such a long
yeah, it
time,
takes
but
such a
it
long
was worth it.
time. And before I get you to read that, just because Cecile popped in as you said that about the honoring,
Yeah,
because she's pretty special. That's what I found when I read her. Such a gentle, pure soul. And I see that essence in you as well. So I felt, it just I kind of want to cry. Um, and it brought me back to originally writing Sarah in my play, that because it's in two halves. And I feel like it might be where you're going with your own storytelling in the next pieces.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but that there's a spiritual essence of someone, like a newer soul,
Mhm.
a more innocent soul that we all have.
Yeah,
And writing about them, and then the wisdom and the persecution and all the harder stuff that comes, but remembering who they are,
yes,
and their complete faith in spirit, their complete gift, their complete shininess.
yes, yes,
Reading her made me miss and remind me why I started with Sarah, the witch in the 17th century, because she had oh my God, everyone, spirit exists. She was like this raving little beacon of light, that I loved remembering her. And when I read Cecile, I was like, oh, this precious jewels on earth. And people miss those people because they're not necessarily the priests or the people in the standing or the head
right.
person. But I just walked in her shoes and I was like, oh, it was a lovely wake up call. And that's why I wanted to celebrate it, to also bring it to to spiritual, soulful people that go, I don't feel, I'm
Yeah.
often silenced and I'm often told I'm crazy, or I don't talk to everyone about who I am. And then I read her and I was like, oh, that's who I am.
Oh, oh, she is quite special. And I think one of the things when I was writing, because you're writing a voice that's speaking, I didn't feel terribly worthy of being able to do this. I doubted myself that why would she choose me? And that's another one that's quite interesting. You mentioned the shadow, and that certainly was within that writing was doubting myself that should I be the person that should write this story, not understanding that we were probably the same in a different life. But
Yeah.
that's something we can come to
Yeah,
later.
we'll come to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's
Yeah.
read your so there's a beautiful epilogue after the story, which I wanted you to read today because I didn't want to ruin too much of your beautiful story for people that wanted to read it, and I really recommend that you do. But it says volumes, so I'd love to hear
Hi.
it.
Okay, here we are. I started writing the story around 1998. It was a strange sequence of events which started the process. I had attended a workshop on past lives and had a very traumatic experience. I was led by the workshop leader to a life as a nun, and was told I had been raped by a priest. I remember being on my knees and hearing this strange wailing coming from somewhere as if it was someone else. The words uttered were, "The shame, the shame." I realized that the voice crying out was my own, and yet not my own. The workshop leader's voice was somewhere in the background, telling the group that this was not made up, but raw emotion. This started something deep within me, and some weeks later, I decided to try my hand at inspirational writing. I had read about this, but never attempted it. The result was quite beautiful and very profound. Spurred on by this first attempt, I started to write again and was amazed to read. It is the summer of 1497. I was so surprised I couldn't stop writing. The words formed onto the page without any need for thought, and within a short while I had filled almost 2 A4 pages. Reading back what I had written, I was stunned. The words on the page seemed to tie in with the experience I had had at the past life workshop. Where were these words coming from? Over the next few weeks and months, I was drawn more and more into the life of Cecile, whose voice this was. I had been told while writing that the story had taken place in France. I set off for the local library, long before Google made this all so easy, to find some books on France and to perhaps find a clue as to where the story had unfolded. I had an inner trust that somehow I had to write the story in order to help this person called Cecile. I had no real knowledge of past lives, but I had a deep sense that I was being used for some reason. I had been on a spiritual path for some time, learning more about life as a soul on this earth and our purpose while we are here. I had a sense that whatever was flowing through me would help me in this process. The first book I opened about France flew open at a page giving information on the Loire Valley, somewhere I'd never been. There was a picture of the Abbé de Fontevraud. I read the information, and whilst reading, found myself shaking and feeling very emotional. It seemed I'd found my answer. In the days following, the writings told more of Cecile's life as a nun and how she came to be in the Abbey. I found that the words which came through often felt as if they had been translated, but sometimes they were a little stilted in English, but still seemed to flow beautifully. Each time I sat down to write, I was so excited as I never knew what would flow from my pen. Soon after I started writing, I had a sense of what had happened in Cecile's life. That is to say, the end result. I did not know how events were to play out. There were times over the many years it took me to complete the story when I left a sentence unfinished, only to pick it up mid-sentence, months and even years later.
Wow.
It was so simple and easy to write, yet I could not understand why I had to push myself to write the story. During the years I've been writing the story, I've met people who are in my life at the moment who also had memories of that life. When recounting my experience of Cecile's story, I often found that people would have the same reactions as I did and sense a shiver or an emotional reaction. Often they would quite clearly see the pictures I was seeing in my head to do with what was happening in the story at that time. Over the years of writing, I have met the Mother Superior, a jailer in the prison at Saumur, Columbine, several of the nuns, the perpetrator of evil, and Daniel himself. It is not easy meeting someone you recognize so well and with the emotion attached. And this is why we normally do not remember our past incarnations, as they can truly play havoc with the life we are in at this time. I am grateful that we were able to pass each other on our individual journeys, as it confirmed for me that the soul does come back many times and that emotions survive the turning of time. It's sometimes too overwhelming to experience such long gone emotion when it reaches us many centuries later. My good friend, the artist Joe Abbott, encountered Cecile whilst I was giving Joe a Reiki treatment. This took place at the time I was receiving the deepest parts of the story. At the session's end, Jo opened her eyes and said, "I've just seen a pregnant nun." And not long after, she painted the image from that encounter. I'm very grateful that Jo has allowed this painting to grace and to complete the book upon its front cover. In writing Cecile's memories, I've realized that my life has been a mirror of her life. This now explains why it took me so long to finish what is in essence a short story. It seemed, however, that I was experiencing in my own life a mirroring of the situation Cecile found herself in. I do not mean by that medieval torture, but similar lessons being learned. Cecile became a huge part of my life and always will be. She has taught me so much, not least about myself. It seems I have been blessed with the ability to access past lives easily. I say blessed, but this can be a curse at times. It has, however, taught me so much about the continuation of the soul and how we do not necessarily live only one life at a time. There is a belief that time is a continuum and events are taking place in the past, the present, and the future, all at the same time. I feel comfortable with this way of thinking, and it has helped me to understand my connection with Cecile in my time. We are at root one and the same being, living as different individuals in different times, but always the same soul. Perhaps we will merge even more as we continue dancing on in the evolution of the soul.
Oh, thank you so much. I got my little shares through the whole of that. My little child that was like, why didn't anyone read us these kind of stories and knowledge in school? That's the teachings. And I thought of how many times Cecile sort of interrupts the story. Interrupts not the right word because it doesn't, it sounds like it gets in the way, and it doesn't. It adds to the story is the word I wanted, with her way she sees the world and with her wisdom. And it's like, and then it's kind of like yours as the writer coming in, and yeah, it's lovely because it's like it just fuses in, so we really grow with the story, which is yeah, yeah, really beautiful. And yeah, so I wanted to, because another thing as you were reading that really made me think about the journey into writing, and writing being a practice, especially when it's this kind of etheric, mystical, soul-led way of working. And I loved it that you said there I was having a Reiki experience, and there was, and other people were sharing the story and they felt these tingles. And the way that I soul guide people in storytelling sessions is I'll listen to them, and until I'm alive and they're getting those tingles and those sensations, I'm like, that's not your soul story. That's not, oh, that's it, that's it, that's it.
Yeah.
And it's like that's a practice, and why I'd always put on the end of the workshop a 2 week to hear what people needed to say and come out. And that also I used to go to healing workshops to develop my material for my play. And I didn't consciously know I was doing that. I would just turn up at a healing workshop And then by the end of it, I'd be channeling the work. And
Oh,
that is kind of why I brought these practices together for people, because you know, there's the structure and the very sort of masculine way of writing, and then there's this feminine healing paradigm where it's like, we're talking about divine inspiration of the soul here, honey. Like
oh,
it's
I
got
love
a
that.
different
I love that
way.
connection. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
wonderful.
And so, yeah, speak to me a little bit about your experiences about that. And I want to ask more recently whether you've had some spirits just giving me a nudge about, um, it's like I'm meant to give you a nudge about more recent spiritual nudges for the next story.
Well, that's interesting that you should say that because when I was writing the book, there's a good friend who helped me to get it self-published, and he suggested, "Oh, it seems to be a good idea to write a little bit about what you're writing now." I was like, "Okay," so I did, but it got stuck again, and this is what's so interesting, how it's like a similar path and just what you were saying about the healing, sometimes we have to go through the depths of the healing. And it's like, if somebody's having a reading or something that they're asking, when's this going to happen? Well, who knows? And I think it's similar to that. You can never tell. You can
Yeah.
never tell when the soul, which is either you or one part of the soul, or the soul that's actually wanting it to be written, wants it to be written, because there has to be a joining in the emotions so that it can be felt. And so I am not blaming myself as I perhaps did when I was writing the story about Cecile. Oh my goodness, I better hurry up. This has to get finished, and I have to do this, I have to do that. Whereas now I'm more aware of, okay, it'll happen when it's meant to happen. And I will then have gone through the experiences that I need to experience. Or it could also be, and I think this is why, I mean, I published this in 2016, but I kind of knew then that it might not have the same effect as I wanted it to. It might not be the right time. It might be the start of a time. But I think sometimes with stories like this, where it comes from the soul, that it might be later on. It might need to be reawakened. Do you know what I mean? It's like
Yeah.
it has that, it can have a bigger effect later on. It doesn't mean to say it was the wrong time that it came out, but it grows and
Mm.
you grow. So where I am at the moment, I've been writing another story, which is another remembered life. And it's not going to be, somebody said to me, "Oh, please tell me that your next story is going to be a happier one." And it's like, well, don't know. Happy, happy, what's that? There's happy in every life. There's
Yeah.
joy and there's sadness, and they're all put together. But it's got a little bit, I'm not going to say stuck, because I don't like that word. It feels like you're not, it's like you're blaming yourself for not working. It's being experienced in a different way at the moment. And I do have a sense that that will soon start again. So that's story two. Story three is probably the one you're feeling. And that came about a few years ago. And that was through deep heartache and grief and but I couldn't go any further with it. So this is where the healing has to happen in each story. So it might be the second story might not be finished, the third story may come first, because I can always see myself as the mirror within.
Yeah, I love that. And I want to speak into a few things about that, because this is the juxtaposition of
Mhm.
being a spiritual creative. I'm listening to you and going, oh, yeah, you've really learned through the first process of when's the time to channel it through, when's the time to heal, when's the time to stop, through living that process. And I understand that it happened to the same to me, that I wasn't ready to finish
Mhm.
Awaken. And actually, I needed to go through and write the second play, because the period of time we're in, as I was writing the second play, was I wrote it quite a few years before. It wasn't really that version. And then when it really channeled through and became a story that I didn't expect was over lockdown. And I
Yeah.
was like, oh my God. And then it turned into being a bit of an activism piece. And I was like, oh, I thought we were going to do all the spirituals now. And it was like, oh, here we go. I was on a new journey, but it was the times we were in as well. It was like, Cheryl, you need to write this. And interestingly, I'd written a synopsis for it previously that I'd lost about going through a lockdown and all this stuff happening that hadn't happened yet. And I'd kind of tapped into the future because we do this psychically with writing as
Yeah.
well. And yeah, and I think, and I will speak of this for me because you spoke a little bit like, am I worthy of this story? I used to have a stop start with my writing where I'd be like, I don't want to be a writer. I
Hmm.
wanted to be an actor. I didn't want to give the time for my writing. I didn't want to look at I guess I didn't want to do all the healing where there was a lot of stop start. So the universe couldn't work with me because I was going, no, no, no. And I really do believe if we're getting the call, which I'm getting the call now, they're like, do the whole trilogy this year. I'm like, this year? All of them? You want me to work? And they're like, yeah, because you've got the tools now. And so you can unlock any block. You're a healer. You can unweave any story. You can do the regressions. You can go back. You can go forward. You've got all this skill set, which is what you're teaching others. Do all three this year. And so I want to bring that in for some people that it's like really tap into what's the block and what's the inspiration and what are you saying no to spiritually? Because if it is that you're not falling into your natural rhythm of like healing and weaving, and you're being asked to be a storyteller more than anything, which is what I'm being asked, and that's why I'm saying it that way, is that it's like, okay, now's the time to commit and using all those tools and techniques to help get it out of you. So that's one process that I'm stepping into and going, okay, I'm completely honoring that. Oh my God, okay. So I've just spoken that out loud because I'm listening. But then there's also that process of newer writers, like when you were talking about when you started back then, and me too, 7 years ago, when I guess we probably didn't know how much healing work was needed.
Yes.
And I try and say that, and that's the whole reason for the courses is like the healing is as important as the storytelling. And if it becomes a back burner, your
Yeah.
story's going to suffer, you're going to suffer, and you're not ready to write as huge a story as it is my learning, and I'm sure it's yours as well. And
Yes.
then there's the midpoint writers where you might have other stuff going on in your life. So it needs to drop in and out. But that's
Mhm.
not because of your blocks, it's because life's going, this is a bigger story, which is what happened to me when I was caring for my dad. And I'd
Yeah.
written Awaken, or so I thought. And I'd actually written a book, partially a bit of a play about someone caring for someone dying of cancer before it happened. And then I stopped. And I didn't want to go off and be a carer. I wanted to be an artist. But the bigger soul work was
Mhm.
I want to look, I want to walk my dad through his death process.
Yeah.
And I got it nearer the end. And then I realized in some weird synchronicity that we have was that was the story.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my gosh, I'd written it. And until I'd walked through it in life, I wasn't ready to write that story. And I was up last night writing the ending, 8 years on, because I was like, oh, I missed the learning. I
Mhm.
was looking over here at something else, and it was this. And so I just wanted to bring all those multitudes of what goes on as a writer so that we recognize what stage we're at, whether life's bigger at the moment. So life is the research for the story, I call
Mhm.
it, or
Yes.
that we need to heal and block that we're not good enough to be a writer, heal all the I can't do this, or I want to do something else, when it's like, no, 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 you're really meant to write this story. Or you're, further along, either going, okay, I need to completely commit, or as you are weaving through, oh, I'm working out my divine timing and what I need to heal and what story is most prominent. All of that
Yeah.
is alive and should be honored, all of those processes.
There's another aspect of that with the timing as well, and I recognize that from these three stories that are inside of me, is about what's happening in the world as well when it's the right time. Because I know when I was writing about Cecile, I did feel that this is the time when the feminine was rising. I mean, started writing this in 1998, which was just, things were beginning to stir, but we're still quite hidden. And so it needed that time to kind of give it more momentum and to be awakened properly so that it was the right time for people to understand. The second story that I'm writing is in some way connected with events that are going on now. And so it's not as easy to have it come out because it might be judged in a different way.
Wow.
Um,
I,
so
yeah.
that's in there as well. Of course, I didn't think this through at first, but it's only when you're actually writing and reviewing it that you see that is part of it as well. So there's this greater hand that is holding the pen along with you. And maybe those stops and starts weren't me. And
Yeah.
it wasn't like, oh, I haven't finished this. And it's not about that. It's not about that at all. And it might be you're waiting for the right person to read it. Maybe they're not born yet. It could be, I don't know. Um,
Yeah, no, I think you're so right because I went through that journey myself of going, it's finished. And,
mhm.
about to put it on in theatre, my first play was just so exciting for me. I had all this support lined up. I worked really hard at it. And literally, I was handing it in March 2020 when all theatres closed. And I was like, what? You know, there, and there's nothing I could do about that.
Yeah.
And then all of the opportunities just stopped. 6 months later, I remember going to a green and just sat and cried. And I was like, you worked me this hard to take everything away. I cried and I let it all out. And then I gave up. And I was like, there's no more walls I can knock at. No one's listening. And then I was like, what can I do? I could write again. So I
Yeah.
went back to writing and kind of went, I don't know I'm sorry, I tried my best. I felt a bit bad, but I was like, there's
Yeah.
nothing I could do. And then what happened in the world? Well, a lot was going on in the world. I was writing about that. But then what happened in the world? There was also this witch zeitgeist that was going on. And a zeitgeist, for people that don't know, is a momentum, a movement, an energetic sort of foray into something. And everyone started to talk about witch persecution, it seemed. And I was like, oh. And then suddenly I got an opportunity to do my play in Scotland, which is where all the movement was going on. And I was like, okay. So now I saw that shutdown, that lockdown of my script, and then the reemergence. And what happened in that period is I started to work with the spiritual community and hear witch stories more. And what changed from a witch persecution actually led me back into, for me, this is a story about the mediums,
Yeah.
not the witches, which I thought it was. It's about the mediums that lost their craft. And it took me back to my great grandfather, who was a famous medium, who was like,
Oh,
she got it now. Like, it's the ancestry. So I love what you said. It's so much bigger than us when you're writing about the soul. And when I say writing about the soul, it means the stories that you're meant to tell.
yeah.
That is a soul story, the story that's meant to be birthed through you and only you. And you might not feel good enough at first, and it might scare the crap out of you as you go in. And it might take a lot of healing and stop starting and divine timing, but it is your story and you are meant to tell it.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. I think one of the things as well is that worthiness of when you're writing, you think, well, who really would want to read this? Even though I'm sure you feel the same, because I felt when I was reading it, because I felt that it wasn't me, it wasn't my voice. I loved it. I loved it so much that I was almost afraid that it would go out there. I remember when I had actually had it published and I imagined that, it was my baby on a boat being thrown into the ocean and please somebody pick it up and because it becomes so precious to me. But I think that's the whole thing. You have to let it go. You have to let it go, and you have to trust.
Mm.
And if it was only for you to go through the healing and to write it, isn't that amazing as well?
Yeah.
So that whole need for somebody else to appreciate it and read it is not always the main point of writing.
Yeah. And I love that. And I want to respond in two ways because as a theatre maker, you do get to get the response to your work.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a gift and sometimes it's a curse because it means that you're like, people sometimes don't think about how there you are naked, especially for me when I'm performing and writing in it. Um, and if, people's feedback isn't the most positive, it's like, okay, yeah. Sensitive soul here. So I've had a
Must
lot
be
of that
hard.
experience. But I've also had the experience of someone going to me, I didn't know why I needed to be here, but your story just changed my life. Or, oh my God, the person that you named, that that really resonated with me because I bring spirits in of other people that have died. Or, I've had really showing my work for the first time in a witch community of people that cared about this cause and seeing them all cry. I was like, oh, that's why I did it. And I'd spent a long time trying to invite theatre people in and they weren't turning up. And then I had this small witch community, and then I realized that's why I was writing it. And so I want to say about your story, because obviously when you send a book out,
Mhm.
you don't always know how it's received. And I don't know how your book's been received, but I know for me, that gave me, I used to say to my friends years back, they used to laugh at me. I'd say, "Oh, that book changed my life." I was so passionate about books
Mhm.
back then, because I wasn't into the arts at the time. So that was my creativity, just reading books. And I'd be like, "I love it. It changed my life." And people go, "Oh, the next one that's changed your life." Oh God, but I did when I had a good read and I felt what it was to be human or to heal or to learn something. And I'd lost touch with that for a long while because I tend to read a lot of stuff I'm learning rather than stories. I love stories. But that I wanted to message someone when I read your book the other day and went, oh, that just changed my life.
Oh,
That
bless.
feeling of like, oh, somebody has spoken directly to my soul.
Oh. And that I think is what, if she was heard that way,
Yeah.
then I've given her a voice, and that is so important. And it's interesting what you say because the feedback that I have got has been so incredibly similar from so many people. I was in that story. That story was about me. I remember being a nun. And it was really interesting. Even people who perhaps had never even thought about past lives or considered it were interested in the whole what's happening here? Why am I feeling the way I'm feeling? Because it's triggering so much in them from their own experiences. And that's what I felt with it, that it was to open up to
Yeah.
all those women at that time.
And
Um,
that's what I felt, which was different from what you were saying. And I'm glad you've triggered me to remind you of it, that because I write about soul stories, because I work as a healer, so I hear a lot of people's soul stories. I read it not identifying with her in any way. Her innocence, yes.
mhm.
And I felt like a wise woman reading it, going, oh, how could she trust so much? And how could she be so pure and not damaged by that? Um,
Mm,
but I also was glad that there were other people like that walking the earth as I've walked the earth many times, because I think we're often taught
yeah.
that there's not so many of us. And what
Mhm.
I felt was, oh, Cecile's soul was walking the earth, at a time when my soul was probably being
Yeah.
persecuted, spiritual person. And so that gave me like a homecoming
Yeah.
of that I didn't expect, that, oh, and there was, because I'd never really tapped into nun lifestyle, or it didn't necessarily resonate with me, but it really opened up. Oh, if you're a spiritual soul and you've gone into a nunnery and she's got all these gifts that are being suppressed, but they're still coming alive in her. It was very similar to a witch story where I
Yeah.
was writing that,
Yeah.
where can you put these gifts at this time when you can't have them? And so
Yeah.
it just made me feel less alone in the timelines, which was
Yeah, yeah,
good.
I understand because I hadn't realized when I first started writing that, there was anything to do with the witch in here at all. And then, it's just grown so massively in the last couple of years. So
Yeah.
I feel quite, I feel quite pleased with myself that I managed to tune into it, even though it's not now. It was like there was a part of it there. It was like an opening in some ways.
Well,
So
it's the same persecution, really.
yeah,
It was really, when you look at it, it was, and I think that's the thing that I found that I kept going with writing about witch persecution, because I was a bit like, but if I'm meeting all these healers that go, yeah, I was killed as a witch in another lifetime, and they've got supernatural gifts, they're meeting all these clients that are saying the same thing, and I'm seeing in my past life that I was killed because I could see spirits, then wasn't there a massive spiritual persecution across the centuries of
yeah,
everyone for their gifts? And
yes,
that's what the
yeah,
actual witch persecution really was. And it
mhm,
might have been called the heretics, or it might have been, different societies or cultures, or
yeah,
the, shamans, or the land keepers,
mhm,
or the
mhm,
nuns, or whatever. But
yeah,
that's been
yeah,
a massive wipeout of those that were tapped into spirit.
yeah.
That's what it
Well,
was.
and I think I've seen that just only recently. I can see the thread that binds together the three stories that have come through. Because the first one, I think I've scribbled it down a bit so I don't forget what I said here, and it's to do with women and the negative influence of the patriarchal society. And one of them is through unrelenting religious beliefs. One of them is the treatment of women by men who see women as something lesser. And the third one is the treatment of indigenous cultures led by the patriarchal belief that some races are more worthy than others. And I can see how that goes through now and how that affects women, how women were affected by these belief systems. Um, and how I have felt that in some way. I couldn't see the thread before. I just thought they were like separate stories, but now I can see, no, that's something that whether I've come to experience that or bring it together or whatever, but that means there will be so many women and men who understand this, of course, who will relate to it.
Yeah.
And that is, in a sense, going back to the beginning, a healing.
Yeah.
So I don't think we often see, or we're led to see writing as something as a healing process, but it's beginning to be understood more so now as such, and that's why I just absolutely adore what you do, because it explains why I did it. And that, he said, for sometimes it feels like you're completely mad. And people say, what are you doing? You're not finished yet. Haven't you done this? So like, what are you doing it for? But now I know because of what you are teaching, which is phenomenal. And I mean, I would recommend your course to anyone who has a story and is trying to find their way. And I think you are so supportive and so understanding as well, because you hold that energy, that gentleness, but you have such power at the same time. So you ignite flames, but at the same time, if it gets too wild, you can calm them down again. So I love it's that. Oh, I can't put it into words. I can feel that, but I don't know if that makes sense to you.
Oh, thank you for sharing that, because I feel like I had two drives from spirit that were really clear. And and I fought against them, don't get me wrong. So please, people, if you're earlier on your journey, I was like, no, my two drives are to do a Mike Leigh play. But that came from ego because he's known in the industry and it was the way to work. What I now realize is that I became Mike Leigh. So he develops improvised material and then does work around that. And instead, that's how I develop my work. So I became that, and I wanted to do my own plays to give a voice. But now I realized further on, when I was getting more and more clear, that I wanted to do my trilogy of plays and give voice more than anything, because these stories need their voice. But I had these two hands, possibly because I'm a Gemini or a twin, many reasons, a twin soul. Um, that I also was like, but I want to change the paradigm of the arts and bring people with me. Like,
Yeah.
it was like, I want to do this and honor my soul in doing this, but I also want to carry the next level of 5D storytellers through and never leave them on their own, and never leave them feeling like I did back then, and that their stories are nourished, because on a selfish reason, I love these stories and I want to see them and hear them and read them. And I've missed that in my culture. And an unselfish reason, there was something in my soul that was like, this is your purpose, to awaken or ignite or excite or activate that collective. Because I'd hear some people being like, oh, I can't do work like that, or oh, the arts is this way, or people don't write stories. And I know lots of different people go, no, 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 people are doing this. And I just wanted to connect them, go, no, 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 don't keep yourself in a box. Don't keep yourself in the box. Put your multidimensionality, your gifts, your healing, your power, your spirituality into your art. And then we can all feel it, that, "Oh, I don't know what this is, but this is a bit different." And that's yeah, that was the calling I got. And I did say, when I got the calling, I was like you, when you said, will anyone want this? I thought, same about my art at the beginning. Will anyone want this? It's a bit out there. And then when I was starting to go, oh, I'll do courses around this, I thought, is anyone going to actually want to do this, or would they rather do it the conventional way? And I had a moment where I was like, I'm cancelling it. I don't care. Spirit told me something wrong. They led me down a corridor. No one's going to do it. And I literally went, no, I'm not going to launch that. And then I was like, oh, hang on. I meant to, though, aren't I? So you got
Yeah.
to take that
Yeah.
jump.
Yeah.
And, and I want to say that about sharing your work with the world, because I've pulled in a little pop-up gathering, because I try and create a spiritual creative community to keep each other going. And recently I've just come to the end of the second course, and people have been sharing their work, and I know how difficult it is to share it when it's in new form. Even when it's finished, it's always difficult, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But it's like, it's so, you don't know the gift that you're going to get from it, do you? Once you start putting it out there, you inspire others to go, oh, I want to do that, or
Yeah.
to feel
Yeah.
so alone, or to heal
Yeah.
something in themselves. So
I
yeah.
I was recently asked to go and talk about the book at my local book club. Well, it wasn't I'm not in the book club, but it was in a local in the town I live in. And I was a bit nervous because I knew it wasn't going to be a 5D.
How are they going to receive this?
What are they going to say? I couldn't believe it. One of the women that was there, she said, I went to the Abbey de Fontevraud in the summer. And she could tell, I haven't been there yet, but she had been, and she could tell me that, what I'd written was true, and that was just amazing. So you just never know, you should never have a closed mind. It was like, and she was like thrilled that she knew where it was and where the story had come from. And they had lots and lots and lots and lots of questions, which was fabulous because I had to look at it in a slightly different way.
And we do that, don't we? We go, oh, if that's not the, I think that's a really great thing to bring up, because sometimes I remember being very comfortable to be spiritual in the spiritual community, and then I had to go, now I'm going to talk about it as a theatre maker.
Yeah, yeah.
And, but it felt like I had to, because otherwise I was keeping myself in the closet in a way.
Yeah,
And I
yeah,
feel that I've been on a similar journey with a lot of things, like which communities to speak into, but that also loads of people advise me, well, why don't you put your work on a festival and some alternative route, because people would love that. And I was like, that's preaching to the choir.
yeah,
I want
yes,
to
yeah,
change the mainstream.
exactly.
Like, I want people to start thinking differently.
Yeah, yeah,
And that's, it's difficult, because it means you're going to go into new circles and go, what about this?
Yeah, yeah,
Also, otherwise things will stay the same. And for me, the spiritual folks still get persecuted because they get pushed out into the outskirts again.
yes,
I'm not
yes.
saying that living on the outskirts isn't probably more pleasant than living in London these days, like I do. But my bigger work is to like change the paradigm, and
Yeah,
I don't want to bash you over the head and make you have spiritual beliefs if you don't.
yeah,
Absolutely not. But
yeah.
I'd like to remind everyone that I think we're all a spark of the divine.
Yes, yes. And so it was, you're always a little bit nervous about it, but it was fabulous. I had a great night. And I was
Nice.
like, from that nervous place, like, what if somebody asks a question that I can't answer, or that, they think I'm mad or whatever it is, but it's not about that. It's about being authentic. If you're completely yourself and you own what you've written,
Yeah.
and a lot of people say that, well, it won't be difficult. Friends who've read it, you can go along and talk about it to anybody because nobody knows it better than you.
Yeah. Well, you're
And
such
that
a
is so
wise
true,
woman.
isn't it? Like,
It's so true. And because you're such a wise woman, and I know because I've worked with you as a healer as well, and I've recommended you to other people as well because it was just brilliant constellation work that we were doing. And I actually came to you and said, "Can we work on my play?" Because I've basically seen into the future that a lot of the way that I work is through constellation
yeah.
stuff to bring through the work because it's healing, and because I'm a physical performer, I've worked in spaces and places and where people are, and we worked, and it did some brilliant things about unlocking a point I hadn't looked at. And actually what came through after the sessions with you was that the antagonist of my story was the female character, and I was looking elsewhere at the men. And we had that session, and it was like the betrayal I felt from a woman turning against a woman in that it was huge. And I guess because I've always idolized women more than men,
Mhm.
maybe because of that patriarchal and my own family relationships,
Yeah.
I find it much easier to get on with them. And that's part of what I'm trying to change. I
Yeah.
was saying
Yeah.
to someone yesterday that I'm working with God. And I
Oh,
said, I'm using that word because I'm working with the divine masculine aspects.
yeah.
And it's
Yes.
sometimes so easy for people to be like, oh, the feminine archetype. And I was like, no, no, no. I need support right now. And I
Yeah.
need to know and remind myself that the divine masculine exists. So I'm working with God. And
Yes.
I mean it
Yeah.
in masculine sense of God. Because when I say God, I don't know why it only says masculine to me. Maybe it's all the years of being taught. I have to say God, goddess, source, if I
Yes.
feel
Yes.
it's in unity.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just the way. So I'm working with that to try and heal that. And something you said earlier about all of your stories making sense. My third story is about sacred union and
Oh,
bringing the,
wonderful.
it's about the soulmate that you lose through lifetimes, and then you find each other when you're both in divine purpose.
Yeah.
But it's like all the lifetimes where the spiritual war happened, that you got torn apart, and the masculine, the patriarchy came in, and
Yeah.
the matriarchy, and all the problems. I'm not blaming either one, with a
No.
corruption that is bigger than us, and that love brings it back together again.
Oh,
And
that's beautiful.
I know, but I'm going, I know I can write the activist one, but that one's like, there's
That's
things we have to do around this one.
I'd be probably the opposite way
Yeah,
around.
yeah,
But I think we are working, and I think this is what many people are working with now, is to bring that balance between the masculine and the feminine. Because even though I've mentioned the patriarchal society, it doesn't mean to say that I'm not honoring the fact that there were many men who were persecuted and who went through huge trials as well. But it's more about how society saw things and not as individual men and women. And I think it's just bringing that all together, the balance between the masculine and the feminine, as you say, it's sacred union.
yeah. And so I want to ask you about something that came through in Channel Your Soul Story course when you were on the course with us.
Mhm.
And I don't know what it is, but I'm just being asked to ask you about something that has come through.
I Yeah, I think
Yeah, I don't know. That's
yeah,
all.
no, I think going back to the beginning of I think it was the first session, the first day, and I do a lot of what would I say? Wisdom, I suppose it is, that comes from somewhere else. And I always know that it's not from here, it's from somewhere else. And I remember that coming through the very first time was when you were talking about how we embark on this journey. It was to do with the journeys. I can't remember exactly now, but I remember writing wisdom from far beyond, from another galaxy or whatever it was, coming through to say, this is where you are and this is where you need to go. And it was just beautiful. It was that sense of I'm in the right place. I know I'm here. And yeah, I'll keep going here. I'll keep going.
It
So
feels like a beautiful start of one of the stories, the wisdom.
yeah, well, sorry about the noise. There's a fire engine going past. I think there's a fire there.
Look at
Well,
it.
yeah.
Remember that thing about igniting people? It was like,
Yes, yeah. It's like,
feels
whoops.
like, oh, I don't know, but be a beautiful start to the third one. The wisdom came from a faraway galaxy, and it said, and then it starts to narrate the story for you,
Yeah.
through you.
And it was giving me the confidence and the understanding. And I always feel held by that sense of the beings. That it's like, it was almost like, tick that box, gold star, keep going.
Yeah. And I think that was one thing that I wanted to bring forward. And you spoke about that so brilliantly, from being honest about like not feeling worthy, and then being like, and when the wisdom comes through, I know I have to do that.
Yeah.
And I remember I had a curiosity about what creative genius was. And I remember my whole life not thinking I could be an actress, that somebody else could be it. And yeah, it was my dream. And I remember going into doing it and then feeling like I was definitely not good enough to do it. And then, it was a really difficult journey for me. And then I thought writing a play was too big for me. But actually, that's kind of why I think the containers and the channeling is so important to me, because when you realize it's bigger than you, and all
Yeah.
you have to do is clear you out of the way, however you do that.
Yes.
And that's half of the practices I'm teaching, to just go, well, this is about healing and clearing the stuff that's not yours, so you can receive a clear
Mhm.
channel, not a distorted channel, which is very
Yeah.
important,
Yeah. Yeah.
because there's wonky channeling practices as well, which I feel I always try and shine a light on. And that when you realize it's bigger than you and you can channel it through, then it's like that's what the elusive creative genius is. It's yours
Yes.
from the universe going, I'll send it to you if
Yeah.
you'll only receive me.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
about receiving it. And it's like, so nobody's better than you or worse than you. But if you have got a creative soul that's like, I'm a creative soul, like, and we're all creative, but I mean, a creative in a storytelling path,
Mhm.
you just open up and you receive it, and it will come through, and you'll have a big story to tell. And
Yeah.
it's here to help the world in some way. And it's
Yes.
happened to me, it's happened to you, and it's happened to many others, whether they talk about it or not, that it's like this is
Yeah.
the process.
I remember one thing when I was hanging on to the story very much because I was afraid to let it go and what might happen. And somebody said to me, he doesn't remember now having said it, but he said, it's not yours to own. It's not yours to own. And therefore, if you hang on to it, it doesn't help in any way because it doesn't reach where it's meant to go. That was quite hard. It's like, ooh, okay. It's like, I hear that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I got told something similar actually, like about it being a bit bigger, like it's bigger than you.
Yeah.
How can you make sure, how can you let it reach? And in that moment, I think it was my sister that was telling me about, like, I wasn't getting funded, and I was like, there must be something wrong with it, and it's not working. And then we looked up and there was a flock of birds going over in the sky, and one big flock, and she went, or you've got to make it everybody's story because it's just been
Oh,
yours. and we let them fly over, and then I was like, oh yeah, I get it. And then when it starts to being beyond you, you're like, okay, I need to get it out into the, okay, how do I serve this collective? Because like you said about your story, people found different things in it, but they found themselves in it, and they, and they surprise you where you go, oh, I
Yeah,
didn't see that, but they
yeah,
did.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. It's fascinating. It really is. So
yeah,
I think that sharing of something, it's what we're here for, isn't it?
yeah. And so on your artistic sharing, as we wrap ourselves up, um, is how what's next for your is where how what's for
Well,
your storytelling?
I recognize, that I do write poetry as well, and I found that it's interesting to see you kind of find your own niche because whether I call it poetry or whatever it is, wise words that come through. So there's a need for that, I think, to be heard as well. So that's something that I'd like to gather all these bits of paper that I know you did encourage us to do, on my to-do list is to find all these scribbles and bits of things that I've written, some that I do know where they are, others I don't, and bring them together because I think that needs to be a kind of compilation as well, because it reminds me of the wisdom that came through from Cecile. Um, and it's really important because it can be something really small that can really help somebody
Yeah,
in what they're going through. So that is there, as well as the two stories that are weaving their way slowly but surely into reality.
beautiful. And that just I got the spiritual nudge there that because you were writing when we did and you had a healing session a little while ago, you were getting a bit of a call to do the children's stories.
Yes. Oh, yes. I haven't even mentioned that.
I
Yes.
know, and that thought through.
Gosh, it's funny how we forget. Yes. No,
I
that
know. It's like
was
I
on
need to
my
remind
thought.
you this.
Oh, no,
And you
thank
sent
you.
me one
Uh,
that you channeled for me for my inner child, and it
yeah.
was so lovely. Like it really made me feel like seen as a little child.
Oh,
Like, oh yeah, that's it. And the
oh,
magical child struggling in the world of how to be. And I guess that we're being reminded that we're also doing these stories for the next generation, so they have a different legacy and a different remembering,
yes.
whether that's
Yeah.
you going into doing it in that work or bringing different stories forward.
Yeah.
And
That,
that I want to remind people that that's what 5D is. There's no set way. It's like, okay, I'm going to be doing these storytellings, but I might be doing some poetry. And actually, I feel like I need to find my voice. So maybe I need to put out platforms where I can speak those stories into. And I
yeah.
remember saying to you all, some people I was even like, by the way, you're not actually writing a book. And they were like, what? And I was like, no, you might be telling your story through a
That
podcast
was
or a
wonderful.
spoken word forum, or and
Yeah.
somebody else I'd be like, just channel your material, and other people like go and structure it, and just that we are multi-dimensional souls, so whatever feeds
Mhm.
creativity in the way that we do it easiest and best is how we're meant to do it,
Yeah. And
not
thank you. Thank you so much for reminding me of what I should know myself. I forget that, and it's funny, there's one part I always forget to mention this about these stories, and I wonder what that's all about. There'll be something underneath there that I need to look at. But yeah, it is that sense of, I think, the childlike, bringing back the wonder into those stories are about how the child felt in
yeah,
a negative sense, and as an adult, how they're feeling as an adult,
yeah.
as the part of them that has been hurt, and then the story then develops into something, and this is what happens. So yeah, I suppose it's holding that childlike essence of who we really are within our soul.
I know, can I set you a bit of homework?
Yeah, yes.
I feel like your homework is to write a little child story for yourself, and it'll unlock a bit of what you can tell in
Well,
this.
I've already done that, so I think I need to go back to it because
Yeah,
that's where
maybe
the
I should read
initial,
it then.
yeah, where the block
Look
might
at
be.
me.
Yeah.
Because it is, there's a lot of our magical child in there in all our stories, isn't there? There's that innocence, and that's what I connected with Cecile, what I found in Sarah Spindler when I wrote about her and her wonder. And it's like, the I don't know about you, but when I came into this world, I felt at times I was a lot wiser when I was a little kid, and then I had
Mhm.
it sort of drummed out of me, and I've had to sort
Yeah.
of claw my way back to all the stuff
Yes.
that I knew naturally and
Yes.
trained out of me. So it's like coming back to the wisdom keeper,
That's
and
it.
now holding space for all of them, like the person that you are today
Yeah.
and the magical child, but also the wise one as well,
Yes. Yes.
taking the
Yes.
stories from all of those angles.
Wow. Oh. Oh, it's been so wonderful speaking to you.
Oh, it's been so good to celebrate these stories. I'm so grateful you sent me your book. Grateful to meet you and your work, and
Oh,
that came upon the spiritual creative
oh,
tribe.
it's just been amazing. So I'm so, so glad that we've met. And honestly, I just hope that many, 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 many more people will come to you and hear your wisdom and have that fire ignited within them.
Yeah, yeah, bless them, and to get to see the plays when they're coming.
Yes. Oh, I can't wait. I
Yeah, I
can't
know
wait.
that
I'm
they're
so looking
starting
forward
to
to
be plans for that happening. I know a few people have written to me and going, "Well, are you ever going to do stuff online? Because it would be being able to
Yeah, oh,
access
I'd
it." But
love that.
I know I'm just seeing, because at the moment I'm planning more my home grounds, and
Yeah.
then seeing how I can do things differently as well. That whole idea of not getting stuck in the way that things are done. How can you open up to all possibilities? So
Oh,
yeah,
amazing.
watch this space
Amazing.
and let us know when the next book is on its way.
I will. Thank you for
All
that.
right, love
Thank you
you
so
so
much.
much.
Wonderful.